Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is mental health. On the conversation on mental health, I'm going to be talking about 3 boundaries you didn't know you needed to put in place. And this is going to be a 2-part series. I'm going to follow it with a series on boundaries that you need to enforce on a day-to-day basis in order to ensure you advocate for yourself. But for this one, I want to just talk about boundaries that maybe we don't know should be established if it is the case that we're focusing on our own well-being and not being able to articulate that to people around us. And also to be able to step into spaces and places and into conversations, really holding our own ground and being able to advocate for ourselves in those conversations. And so here are some boundaries that I feel translate in the personal as well as the professional realm. And they're boundaries that I enforce unapologetically. And I think that the point of emphasis here is to be unapologetic, and it's something that I spent my lifetime learning to be. So it's not natural that I'm unapologetic about the ways that I take a stance or about the positions that I take, but I've recognized that in order for me to honor myself, in order for me to be able to properly advocate for myself, sometimes it means being comfortable in uncomfortable situations or having difficult conversations. And so some of that translates as my first point, which was not letting other people speak on your behalf, not letting other people put words or states of mind or states of being in your mouth. And it's really, really important that you ensure that if it is the case that you find yourself in a conversation where someone is trying to position you as being in a specific state or place, that you correct them, and you correct them forcefully, immediately, abruptly, and unapologetically. You can be forceful without being rude. I think that there's a demarcation, there's a difference between the two of those things. But if you're in a conversation and you're establishing your credibility in that conversation, if someone's trying to discredit you or trying to position you as being unsure or as being confused, and you know that you are confident in the position that you're taking, then you immediately take those words out of their mouths and you discredit them out of the gate. You don't let people put labels on you or put you in a decision criteria or in a decision box that you're not in, right? So if someone is trying to insinuate that I'm confused or that I'm unsure, that I lack expertise in a specific area, I'm going to call it out immediately for what it is, and I'm going to let them know in no uncertain terms that that absolutely is not true. And that is me establishing a boundary, because for me, ultimate boundaries are making sure that I'm not allowing people to dishonor me or to be disrespectful to me by putting states of being or putting labels on my behavior that I don't align to, right? Behind your back, like, these are things that you can't control if you're not part of those conversations. But if I am in a conversation, I will not allow someone to position me as feeling a certain way about something that I don't feel. I will not allow someone to put me in a faction that I'm not in, or to give me a position that I'm not taking. Like, if that's not how I feel about something, I'm going to absolutely speak up and also speak out to the behavior in and of itself. I think that it's inappropriate for anyone to assume the authority to speak on anyone else's behalf, especially in a professional setting, but even in a personal setting. If I've not given you that permission to speak on my behalf, then I'm going to ensure to correct you in that point in time. And I think that too often we want to be polite and we find ourselves flustered thinking about, well, how do I engage in this politely, but recognize that it's impolite to have someone position you as feeling a certain way or as believing a certain thing that you don't believe. So I think you can establish decorum. I think that at that point you need to give yourself permission to be unapologetic about correcting whoever it is that is speaking and setting the tone. And I think that that's super important, and something even as a woman is difficult to do, but it's important to do. My second point really does lead into gender identity and how that translates in the different spaces and places that we're in. I think it's really important that we're unapologetically aligned to the identity that we associate with. I am someone in my own right, like the way that I manage, the way that I lead, the way that I make decisions. I'm sure a lot of that, if not the majority of it, is influenced by me being a woman, and I'm happy to be a woman. I don't feel any shame in being a woman. I don't feel like it puts me at a disadvantage. And I think that it's really, really important that I recognize my importance in making sure that I articulate and vocalize my position in the situations where someone is trying to establish like a male dominant or a male way of thinking as the norm. And I think that there are so many different ways to show up in different spaces that are really valuable, that are really impactful, that have a lot of influence. And in settings that are typically like male dominant, like when you have more women coming into those settings, like you need to recognize that that is going to shift and change the way certain conversations are had. That's going to shift and change the way things are going to evolve, the way that things are going to progress. I think that it's really important that we all learn to expand our scope of reference to recognize that leadership translates in different different ways. And often it is the case that our biases or our prejudices or our beliefs around leadership, around managing, or around directing, they can be very male dominated beliefs. They can be biased by how men do it typically, because typically there are certain roles that have been traditionally male. But as women step into it, like, you need to give the license and the grace for the translation of femininity to be at play. And I think that it's too often that I have found, especially as I started out in my career, that a lot of women try to adopt like these very male personas. Like, they really try to emulate masculine traits in order to be taken seriously. And I am very much of the position that it's important that I teach the people around me that just because I am showing up as feminine as I can be, that it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take me seriously, that it would be a mistake even to not take me seriously. And I have zero interest in adopting and emulating male traits in order to be recognized as credible. I think that it's really very important, not just for me, but for the leaders who are going to model after me or who are going to follow in my footsteps, to be able to feel like they can be aligned to themselves, whether that's feminine, masculine, or anything else, but they can give themselves the permission to be a leader in the way that that translates and how gender influences that leadership style and that leadership language and that leadership positioning. I think that it's so important that we recognize that leadership doesn't mean emulating masculine traits. I think it's really important that we recognize that we can be impactful, we can have influence, we can push the needle on progress and on transformation and on disruption while maintaining our own personal identities and not assuming alternate or masculine or traditionally male identities. And I think that's an important boundary that each of us need to really be cognizant of establishing in every conversation. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that there are certain difficult conversations that absolutely need to be had, and they don't need to be explosive, they don't need to be off the kilter, but they need to be had. They need to be the kind of conversations that give people the opportunity to reflect, to correct, and to expand their scope of reference by way of leadership. Now, another boundary you didn't recognize that you needed to have is boundaries around agency. And I think that this is really important because some people assume that because they have a specific role in your life, that means that they can usurp or cannibalize on your sense of agency. And for me, that's absolutely not true. My agency always is paramount. Like, my capacity to make decisions as it relates to my life, however that translates, is always going to be, at the end of the day, the number one lever that I leverage when it comes to like the choices that I make that are going to impact my life on the midterm and the long term, so on and so forth, even sometimes in the short term. And I think that it's important that we recognize that autonomy is not like a nice to have. It's critically important, and it's important that we recognize that the people that we have around us are the kinds of people that are cognizant and respectful of our autonomy. They don't feel threatened by our autonomy. They don't want to infringe on our sense of agency. Our capacity and our ability and frequency by which we make decisions isn't something that they find threatening or daunting or intimidating or something that they need to challenge or manipulate or to change. And I think that I love having conversations that are collaborative, that are co-creative, where it is really a joining of great intellectual minds. I'm not really that interested in having conversations with people who are trying to suffocate my own personal sense of agency and autonomy. And I've been very mindful in putting myself in situations where my autonomy, my agency is respected, and it gives space to flourish, it gives space to grow, because we're adults, right? And the better and the more leeway that we have in making decisions, the better we are able to make decisions, right? Like, decision making isn't something that we're born out of the gate having a super strong skill in being able to do. It's something that develops by way of its accuracy, by way of its agility, by way of its impactfulness with time and experience, with trial and error, with failures and with falls. And I think that I'm very good at making decisions because I've been given license to make decisions in my career since a very early age. And I started out my career again at 19, so I started out fairly early, but I was given a lot of autonomy very early. A lot of it was maybe more than what I can handle, but I grew into that autonomy. I grew into that agency. I was able to leverage my capacity to make critical choices because I was trusted to make critical choices. And since I've been trusted with that as part of the foundation of who I am, like whether that was who I am in a professional or in a personal vantage point, then now I recognize that that's a really big value of mine going to any room or going to any conversation that I find myself in. So those are some of the boundaries that you didn't think you needed to have. I think that they're super important boundaries, the kind of things that you don't want to take lightly. And if you want to have more conversations on alignment, more conversations on how you develop that inner mastery, then I think that you should join the conversation. We do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website. So definitely check those out. See which ones you want to participate in. And yes, be part of our game changer community, being part of the change that you want to see, allowing us a small role to play in your journey. We are on the road to 1K, and we do also provide parent-child workshops. Or if you're looking to focus on leadership development in your children, then we have the modules for you with a focus on cultivating intellectual development and character development with 4 key modules focusing on self-concept, autonomy, self-efficacy, and compassion. So those are some of the things that we have available to you, something to meet anyone in your family's needs. And thank you again for tuning in. Make sure to leave us a follow, and we look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.